Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
First one is titled, No Beer for You. This happened quite a long while ago when I was bartending and waiting tables in a small bar, family restaurant in Virginia. In Virginia, the ABC board controls all alcohol sales and has some rather strict enforcement around proper ID for alcohol sales. If you served someone unlawfully, either underage or without proper ID, the business incurred a fine or a suspended license if it's been several violations, and the individual that sold to the customer would get a personal fine as well. I think it was around $1,000 or $1,200. I'm not up on current laws, so they may have changed in the 20-ish years since I last had to deal with them. It's also possible that some of these restrictions were partly company policy. It's been a while. Anyway, proper ID meant it had to be intact, not expired, and most importantly present at the bar. It was a rural area where I grew up in, so I knew how to be pretty annoying to some of the older than me gentlemen that came in. A guy around 40 and his family was seated at a big round table in the bar area. Wife and 3 or 4 kids. I remember the kids were pretty young, so I'm already judging for having the kids in the smoking per bar area. It was still legal to smoke indoors then. I'm also pretty annoyed as it's a college bar, sports bar vibe, on a Sunday afternoon, and they were taking up a valuable table in the bar area that I would have otherwise had a table of drinkers that would most likely tip better and require less work. That aside, I go up and I'm nice to everyone because tips. Go up and say hi. Dude immediately barks at me to get his game on the bar TVs, not even pretending to be pleasant, and calls me girly, which makes me see red immediately. I grew up with too much of that redneck patronizing kind of BS, and that particular term has always filled me with rage. I know I'm not getting jack for a tip because I'm girly, and I know this type of guy. When he asks to order a pitcher, I ask for ID. We were told if they looked over 30 we didn't have to ask, but as it was our fine too, we could always ask if we felt the need. It's a pretty petty bit of annoyance, but was one of the few powers I had to be annoying and not be doing anything wrong in my job. Usually it just means they have to fish their wallet out or possibly go out to their car to get it. I always made the annoying ones remove it from the holder, and if I lucked out it was one with a clingy clear window that took them a few minutes to get out. Like I said, petty as hell, but he called me girly. He doesn't have his ID. This is where malicious compliance comes in. I asked this guy that was obviously over the legal drinking age of 21 to be a little annoying, but now that he can't provide it, I must adhere to the letter of the law and won't serve him. I tell him I can't serve him, and tell him legally I can't, now that I've asked for ID and he can't provide it. He throws a fit, says he'll go up the road to a pizza place that had beer and how I'm losing out, and he wants to talk to my manager. Tables nearby are giving him the stink eye. Manager is kind of annoyed but backs me because as we are in a small college town, we're really strict as the business would die if the ABC liquor license was suspended or revoked, and as a server I have the right to refuse as it's my behind on the line as well. I would speculate that we would have never received a violation if we had had a walk-in compliance check unless we were on the hit list that week, but for him I do everything perfectly by the book. I actually felt slightly bad because they kids seemed disappointed to leave, but it was on him at that point since his pitcher of beer was more important than his family eating where they wanted. Next one is titled, Employer Doesn't Want Me to Waste 2 Hours. They waste 40 instead. A number of years ago I worked for a small, fairly local outsourcing company. I was assigned to work with a particularly high-profile client of theirs. The client's office was just around the corner from my employer, but my employer insisted that I remain within their own offices to work, so the client provided me with a laptop to use that connected to their network remotely. It's important to note that whilst the client was decent, my employer had a totally fear-based management culture. The managers wanted eyes on the employees at all times because they assumed people would slack off given half the chance. After almost a year of working there, I got a call from the client notifying me that my client-given laptop needed some critical updates, and I would have to bring it in so IT could apply the updates locally. All sounded very reasonable to me. I brought this to the attention of my manager and advised I would be out of the office for a while so I could take my laptop to the client site around the corner for critical updates. No bueno. My manager ignored everything about the critical updates part and focused instead on the out of our office for 2 hours part. They insisted that they knew I had a remote connection to the client's office, so any updates could be applied without me needing to leave and take my laptop anywhere. I got the impression they thought I was lying to get some free time off. I decided that this had the potential to teach my employer, the managers, a great lesson about not trusting their own employees. So like the model employee I was, I shrugged, "You know best, boss," and complied with their request, continuing working as usual. Until the following morning, when I switched on my laptop and nothing would work. The machine refused to connect to the client's remote network. The various software applications I used for my job also wouldn't run due to the lack of connection. Error messages flashed up on every file I tried to access, warning that my credentials had been blocked. I was left holding a very expensive brick. My manager was livid when I explained I couldn't do any work. They clicked around on my laptop trying to fix it themselves, but there was no other solution to be had. They sent me around the corner to the client's office so I could hand in my laptop to IT. I took my time enjoying a coffee and breakfast in the client's on-site cafe whilst IT worked on my laptop, but when I went to check on it after an hour, I believe the client IT manager's words were, "It's ducked." The critical update mentioned before was intended to repair something wrong with the way the remote connections worked. When my machine didn't get the update, it lost connection with the client's network and immediately locked me out of everything, effectively blacklisting my credentials. IT manager explained that they would have to build me an entirely new machine and set up new accounts, a process that would take about a week to ensure everything filtered through correctly and could be tested. The client was fine and understanding about it, but when I returned empty-handed to my employer's office, my manager got extremely snotty with me and insisted I still had to work somehow. I pointed out that I had no client laptop to work on, so instead of sending me home, they forced another employee to share her computer with me. For the next week, me and my colleague shared her computer, 1 hour each at a time. As I had no access to any of my files, client data, etc., all I could do was the barest minimum of work, sending a few emails from my colleague's account. After a week, I got my new client laptop and things went back to normal, but the week of sharing meant my employer had lost around 40 hours of productivity from 2 employees. The shared pain of the experience with my colleague brought us closer together, and when my employer lost their contract with my client a few years later, she helped me get a new job with my employer's competitor. Next one is titled, "The Law is the Law." I once hosted an event in a bar. It was a kind of celebration for police trainees. New recruits, that kind of thing. Anyway, as I was busy slaving away, pouring drinks, etc., this one woman who was absolutely full of herself was watching me pour measures for another customer, making comments about the amount of ice in drinks, how I was using the wrong glass, I wasn't, and other obnoxious comments about how she was waiting to be served and she was here first, she wasn't. I was pouring some spirits, and for those who don't know, they come in standard sizes of 25 milliliters for singles, 50 milliliters for doubles, etc. I reached the end of the bottle as I was pouring the whiskey and there was a tiny drop left, so I just poured those few extra ml into the glass. Which you shouldn't really do, but who cares, right? Anyway, she gets up in my face about how it's technically illegal to pour extra measures and that the law is the law and I should follow the law to the letter. I tried to brush it off and ignore her and carried on serving other customers. But there she was commenting on pretty much everything I was doing, and as everyone who has worked in customer service, you know how annoying it is to have everything scrutinized and commented on as though you're nothing but a useless piece of crap. It comes to her turn and she asks for an alcoholic beverage. So using my limited powers, I ask her for her ID. She goes bright red in the face and stutters something about being old enough to be in the police. I tell her, sorry. If you don't have ID, I can't legally serve you. The law is the law after all. Lo and behold, she didn't have ID and had to settle for lemonade. Next one is titled, Can't Work Remotely? Guess it's vacation or sick leave, then. As you can imagine, a lot of companies are figuring out how to manage remote staff right now in response to COVID-19. I am a social media manager for a large university, and am considered essential staff. For some instances, if there's a snow day, I can work from home but need to monitor social channels for questions, problems, etc. Weeks before the virus got as widespread as it is now in the US, I asked my supervisor to consider remote options as my husband and I had been keeping a close look at its progression abroad, and he has an autoimmune disease, but I was literally laughed at and told it would never happen. Last week, our university announced that they'd be shifting to online learning for 3 weeks. I again asked if we'd be given remote options at this time as well to help flatten the curve, and given that my job can be done literally anywhere, it shouldn't be a problem. I again was told nope, as essential staff, I'd absolutely have to come in, and more details would be given in an HR email later that day. HR email comes in and affirms that all staff were expected to come in as normal, about 4,000 employees, and if you wanted to take time at home, you'd need to take personal, vacation or sick time. Staff could call, email HR and make individual cases to request remote work, but I'm in the state with the 4th highest cases of COVID-19 right now, and we all know college campuses are cesspools for disease, so staff is livid. The next day, I emailed my supervisor again and told them that I emailed HR saying that if I don't get approval for remote work, I'm going to follow email protocol and take sick leave for the foreseeable future. Luckily, I am in a union and can request up to 26 weeks of 100% paid sick leave for myself or caring for family, and I knew it would get approved. I said the ball was in their court, and they could either have me at home actually working, or have me at home and be down an essential staff member. Silence. In the meantime, I got a phone call back from HR from a frantic employee who said they received literally thousands of emails, phone calls similar to the one I sent and I could expect an update by end of day. Turned out I was not the only one threatening their bosses with time off. At 5 p.m., we got an email that all staff and classes are remote until further notice. I know it's likely they would have eventually made this call anyway, but I'd like to think the thousands of employees threatening malicious compliance made it happen sooner. Next one is titled, "Want me to follow company guidelines? You might lose more than you thought." This story happened about 3 years ago. So I work for a railway company as a train manager, and during the checking of tickets we get a little gray zone, as we call it, to bend the rules a little bit as we see fit, mostly to avoid aggression and to make sure we can live with ourselves afterwards. While checking 2 guys, they both had a ticket with reduction, but only one had a valid card that granted said reduction. In this case it was for low-income families. They have 50% off on public transport here. Those cards are strictly personal and have to be renewed yearly. When I asked where the second guy's reduction card was, he said he forgot it at home. It's clearly stated on the ticket and the card that the ticket is only valid with the card. Now because he used his friend's card to get his ticket, I should immediately give him a fine. But because I am not a very strict person, and feel a little bit sorry for people with low incomes, I decide to disregard the wrongfully bought ticket and treat him as if he had no ticket. Meaning I get to sell him one at a slightly higher cost because they should have one before getting on board. Now the guy that forgot his ticket was thankful because a fine would be more than 5 times the amount of the new ticket. However, his friend decided he didn't want to play by the rules and started insisting he'd get the fine and that he would pay it later. They eventually started arguing and I tried to intervene only to have the second guy insult me. Which is where I drew the line. I'm used to being insulted by now, so it doesn't bother me at all, but that doesn't mean I let people get away with it easily. Which is where the malicious compliance comes in. I calmly asked, "Sir, are you certain you want me to follow company guidelines here?" To which of course he answered yes. So I proceeded to make the fine, and then when I was done, "Sir, according to government and company guidelines, using your reduction card for a third person other than yourself voids your right to have said card, and hereby I will have to confiscate it. Now this card is more than just reduction for public transport, but more or less any government-funded business." Now he started completely losing it, and a coworker already heard that I had a difficult customer and came to assist me. I told the guy that he had to calm down and let me do my job because otherwise company policy instructed me to call railway security on him. I continue checking the other passengers, and then about 40 minutes later at the final station the two guys came to me and the second guy apologized for his behavior. Which I must say caught me completely off guard. So I returned to my helpful self, cancelled the fine. We can do that within an hour of making it, sold them the normal slightly more expensive ticket and gave him his card back. I really didn't feel like doing the paperwork for it anyway. So in the end me being maliciously compliant made him rethink his actions and hopefully turned him into a better person. Last one is titled, Classic Sketchy Vacuum Salesman. I worked at a well-known vacuum company as assistant manager for almost a year. The manager was a classic sketchy salesman, but he never totally crossed the line until the following story. I live in a place with lots of forest fires in summer typically. We had a lady drop off her vac for diagnostics, but she called within days to explain her house is in the middle of an evacuated area, and she is much too busy to come get it. I told her this is totally fine and of course we understand. My manager hadn't even finished diagnosing it to my knowledge. I immediately let him know the situation, not to mention it's kept in a record on his computers anyway so he can check what needs doing. Cue another few days later, and a customer needs a specific hose for their vac. My manager proceeds to look in the back, finds the hose for the vac previously lady left, and makes out like he's going to sell it. I went to him, took him in the back right away, and reminded him that she will be back and then what will we do? This is her property still and not ours. He of course ignores me, and proceeds to cut the electrical components and sell the hose to the next customer. The next customer needed a hose, but didn't need the electrical component which was in the way for their vac. To my absolute glee, the original lady shows up literally the next day, karma. I felt bad for her but was very excited to see the drama ensue. She comes in looking for her vac. My manager acts like he doesn't know what she's talking about. She's screaming at him. I proceed to show them both the record on the computer. He still acts like he doesn't know. He then says he threw it out, a lie. So I say let's go look in the bins together. They haven't taken them since she dropped it off. Needless to say, it was very satisfying seeing it all fall apart so perfectly. He had to compensate the lady with a whole new vacuum. I quit not long after. Weirdest effin' person I've ever worked for, and a total scammer. Thanks for listening.